What's going on, guys? Evan Preco here, and you are watching the SG1 Sports Big Ten Football channel. In this video, we are going to recap all of the games, all of the Big Ten games that took place over this weekend for Week 2. And with that, let's get it started. So for the first game of the video, we've got Vanderbilt at Purdue. And to start off, we're going to look at the stats. For Purdue, Elijah Sindelar was the starting quarterback. He took over after David Blau graduated. In this game, he went 34 of 52 for 509 yards, 5 touchdowns, and 1 interception. Xander Horvath was their leading rusher. He only had 8 carries, only 15 yards, which is just under 2 yards a carry, no touchdowns. Rondale Moore went absolutely off in this game. He had 13 receptions for 220 yards, averaging about 17 yards a catch and 1 touchdown. As a team, Purdue only ran for 31 total rushing yards, and they had 540 total yards of offense. For Vanderbilt, Riley Neal was the starting quarterback. He went 24 of 35 for 378 yards, 2 touchdowns, and 1 interception. Keyshawn Vaughn was their leading carrier. He had 17 carries for 56 yards, averaging 3.3 yards a carry, and he had a touchdown run. Chris Pierce was their leading receiver. He had 3 receptions for 133 yards, averaging 44.3 yards a catch, and a touchdown. As a team, they only ran for 71 yards, and they had 420 total yards of offense. The final score for this game was Purdue obviously winning it 42-28. My reaction to this game: good win for Purdue. This is exactly what they needed to bounce back to from the loss that they had last week against Nevada. Purdue is kind of one of those Big Ten teams where you think they're going to be really good, but you don't necessarily know. Obviously, we did not think they were going to lose last week to Nevada. That was kind of a big blow for them. But, I still think that Jeff Brom is a fantastic football coach, and he is right where he needs to be at Purdue, and he'll get them going there. And he did on Saturday. They had a good win. Obviously, they beat an SEC team, and they beat a good defense. They had 540 yards on this defense and scored 42 points. Vanderbilt started the game off strong. They scored first, but then, Purdue answered, and they eventually took the lead, and they made it a bigger lead. And Vanderbilt kept fighting. I'm going to give them a lot of credit for that. They kept fighting. They tried to make it a game, and there were times where they'd make it, an 11-point game, or a 14-point game, but it seemed that every time they got close, Purdue kept getting away, and they kept increasing the lead. So a good win for Purdue, a good way to bounce back from last week, and I think that they're going to be ready for Big Ten play when it comes, and I think that they're still going to be a solid team this year. I don't know how much better they're going to be than they were last year, but I still think that they're going to be very good, and they showed how good they can be on Saturday. The next game on the list is Eastern Illinois at Indiana. And to start off with Indiana stats, Michael Penix Jr. got the start at quarterback. He's the lefty. He went 14 of 20 for 197 yards and 2 touchdowns. And then Peyton Ramsey played in the second half. He went 13 of 14 for 226 yards and 2 touchdowns. Stevie Scott III was their leading rusher. He had 12 carries for 61 yards, averaging just over 5 yards a carry and 1 touchdown. Donovan Hale was their leading receiver. He had 5 receptions for 110 yards, averaging 22 yards a catch and 1 touchdown. They ran for 114 total rushing yards, and they had 555 total yards of offense. For Eastern Illinois, Jonathan Brantley got the start at quarterback. He went 8 for 17 for only 49 yards, no touchdowns. Darshan McAuliffe had 6 carries for only 17 yards, averaging under 3 yards a carry and no touchdowns. He was their leading rusher. Their leading receiver was James Sheehan, if I'm pronouncing that right, James Sheehan, with 2 receptions for 18 yards, averaging 9 yards reception, no touchdowns. They only ran for 52 yards, and they had only 116 total yards of offense. The final score of this game, as you can predict, was a blowout. Indiana won 52-0. My reaction thoughts to that: good win for Indiana, just like I said for Purdue. It's a good win. I think Indiana, the pieces are finally coming together for them with Tim Allen as head coach. Obviously, he's a defensive guy, so he's going to do good things with that defense. The problem had been their offense, but in the offseason, they had gotten some good guys, so a lot of Indiana fans were very optimistic about how their offense would perform, and they performed very well on Saturday. They threw the ball a lot, and they threw the ball well. They didn't run it that much. They only had 114 rushing yards, but I mean, why run the ball when you can throw it as well as they are? I think that they're doing. They did very well offensively on Saturday, and I think that they will continue to do well. Obviously, Big Ten defenses are going to be much better than Eastern Illinois' defense, but I still think that this offense can put up a lot of points against the weaker defenses in the Big Ten, and I think that they're gonna they could outscore some opponents and win some games and possibly put Indiana in a bowl game this year because that's something that they've been missing out on for the past few years. So good win for Indiana. I think they're going to be good. I think that their offense is going to be tremendous, and we'll see what happens in the future with that. Next up on the list, we have Illinois at UConn. And to start off with Illinois stats, Brandon Peters was starting quarterback. He was the quarterback for Michigan a couple years ago, and he is now at Illinois. He went 22 of 33 for 225 yards, 4 touchdown passes, 1 interception. Jakari Norwood was their leading rusher. He had 6 carries for 62 yards, averaging 10.5 yards per carry, no touchdowns. Ricky Smalling was their leading receiver. He had 5 receptions for 54 yards, averaging 10.8 yards per catch and no touchdowns. And Josh Imatorbhebhe was also a big factor in Saturday's game. He had 4 receptions for 42 yards, averaging 10.5 yards per catch and 2 touchdowns. As a team, Illinois only ran for 130 yards, and they had only 355 total yards of offense. For UConn, Jack Zergiotis was the starting quarterback. He went 21 of 31 for 275 yards, no touchdowns, and 2 interceptions. Kevin Mensah was the leading rusher. He had 14 carries, only 27 yards, averaging just under 2 yards a carry. He had a touchdown, though. Cameron Ross was their leading receiver. He had 4 receptions for 85 yards, averaging 21.3 yards per catch, no touchdowns either. As a team, UConn only ran for 10 yards, and they had only 285 total yards of offense. The final score of this game was Illinois winning 31-23. And my reaction, Illinois, in my opinion, started this game off horribly. They threw a pick six very early in the game, and they were down 13-0 at one point, I think at the end of the first quarter. But then, their offense showed up, and they ended up scoring 24 unanswered points. They made the score 24-13, and they forced a couple turnovers. UConn kept fighting. They scored again to make it close, but then Illinois answered them to make it 31-20. UConn added on a field goal toward the end of the game to make it an 8-point game, but then that was it, and that was the final score, 31-23. I think that Illinois, the reason they beat UConn, is just because they're a Big Ten team. They get better recruits, so they have better athletes. Brandon Peters, I thought, played well. Yes, he threw the pick six at the beginning of the game, but then he threw for over 200 yards, completed 67% of his passes, and 4 touchdowns, which is really good. And one of the touchdowns was a huge play he made on his own, where he scrambled out of the pocket and kind of not really threw it up for grabs, but threw it up into the back of the end zone and just placed it perfectly for his receiver to get it. So I thought that overall he played really well. They should get the running game going a lot more in future games because they did not run the ball very well. And in Big Ten games, Illinois cannot start a game as bad as they did against UConn, or else they're not going to be able to recover. UConn's not a great football team, so that's why they were able to recover and score 24 unanswered points and win the game. Against a Big Ten team, I don't see them doing that, so I think that Illinois does have a lot of things to fix. I'm still optimistic they can win a few games in conference play, but I do think that they overall have to start games better than they did against UConn. So the next game that we have is Cincinnati at number 5, Ohio State. So Ohio State stats, Justin Fields, of course, was the starting quarterback. He went 20 of 25 for 224 yards, 2 touchdown passes, no interceptions. He also ran the ball 9 times for 42 yards, averaging 4.7 yards a rush and 2 touchdowns on the ground. J.K. Dobbins was their leading rusher. He had 17 carries for 141 yards, averaging almost 8.5 yards per carry, and he had 2 touchdowns too. Benjamin Victor was their leading receiver. He had 5 receptions for only 69 yards, averaging just under 14 yards a catch, no touchdowns. Ohio State ran the ball for 270 yards as a team, and they had 508 total yards of offense. For Cincinnati, Desmond Ridder was the starting quarterback. He went 13 of 20 for 166 yards, no touchdowns, and 1 interception. Tavion Thomas ran the ball 11 times for 58 yards. He was their leading rusher for 5.3 yards per rush, no touchdowns. Alec Pierce was their leading receiver. He had 4 receptions for 93 yards, averaging 23.3 yards a catch and no touchdowns. They had 107 total rushing yards, and they only had 273 total yards of offense. The final score of this game, another blowout, Ohio State 42, Cincinnati 0. My reaction and thoughts, this is what we expected. Ohio State is one of the top teams in the country, especially offensively. Defensively, they're playing well. They're playing a lot better than I thought they would have, because Cincinnati is a good football team. I still think they are. They beat UCLA last week, and I think that they are going to do good things in the American Athletic Conference. I think that they have a good coach, and I think that they're going to have a good season. It's just Ohio State is really, really, really good. And Cincinnati, yes, they didn't score any points, but they had chances. They had chances to put points on the board. I think in the first quarter on one of their first drives, they moved the ball right down the field into field goal range, and they had a field goal blocked. Late in the third quarter, they moved the ball down the field to like goal to go situation, and they threw an interception. And then right at the end of the game, Tavion Thomas was about to score a touchdown, and he fumbled the ball at like that 1-inch line, and it was recovered by Ohio State. So, Ohio State doing a good job forcing turnovers to keep their opponents from scoring. But Cincinnati, they move the ball up and down the field, which is a good thing for them. They're going to be a good football team. Ohio State, they haven't slowed down with Ryan Day. I never thought they would, and so far they haven't. 42-0 against a good team. That's fantastic for Ohio State. Justin Fields played well through the air and on the ground. J.K. Dobbins went off. Like I said, he had almost 150 rushing yards and had multiple touchdowns. Receiving-wise, Benjamin Victor, I think, should get more targets. I'm not sure if he was double covered or not, but I think that he could definitely be more productive in the passing game. Chris Olave played well. So he got a lot of their catches. But yeah, I think that Ohio State's offense is one of the top in the Big Ten, if not the top in the Big Ten, and definitely one of the top in the country. So big win for them. There's not much to say about this one. I think Ohio State's great. I still think Cincinnati's good. They just didn't play that well against a very good team. So they will be just fine. Next up, we've got Central Michigan at number 17, Wisconsin. And Wisconsin stats, Jack Cohn was the starter again. He went 26 for 33 for 363 yards, 3 touchdown passes, no interceptions. Jonathan Taylor, of course, was their leading rusher. He's a Heisman candidate. He had 19 carries for only 102 yards. It's weird how I'm saying only to 102 yards, which is still a good performance, averaging 5.5 yards a carry and 3 touchdowns. Quintez Cephas was their leading receiver. He had 6 receptions for 130 yards, averaging 21.7 yards a catch and 2 touchdowns. As a team, Wisconsin ran for 199 total yards, and they had 599 total yards of offense. For Central Michigan, Quentin Dormandy was the starter. He went only 5 for 12, only 36 yards, no touchdowns, and 1 pick. Tommy Lazzaro was their leading rusher. He had 4 carries for 11 yards, averaging just under 3 yards a carry, no touchdowns. And Khalil Pimpleton had 3 receptions for only 18 yards, averaging 6.0 yards a catch, and he had no touchdowns either. They only had 15 total rushing yards as a team, and they had only 58 total yards of offense. The final score of this one, another blowout. Wisconsin 61, Central Michigan 0. My reaction and thoughts, I know it's only week 2, but I can already tell this Wisconsin team is a much better team than they were last year. And one reason why I think I can say that this early was you look at the early games that they played last year against nobody schools, and they only won those games by like 21, 24 points. So far, they've beaten Southern Florida on the road 49-0, and they beat Central Michigan 61-0. They have outscored their opponents in 2 games 110-0. Obviously, they haven't played, a team with a really talented offense yet. But this defense for Wisconsin, I think, is back after they took a year off last year. They have not given up any touchdowns. They have not given up any points to their opponents yet. And next week they play Michigan. That could be a very, very good football game, especially with the way that Michigan struggled on Saturday. But I'll get to that here later. Yeah, big win for Wisconsin. They're winning games, and not only are they winning games, but they are blowing out the teams they're playing. Even though they're not really playing anyone. Um, I still think that they're a very good football team this year, and it shows in the rankings. If you look up the top 25, right now they're number 14. Jonathan Taylor it's weird how he has over 100 yards rushing, and I'm here saying, oh, he only had this many yards. He only had 102 yards. That just shows how good he is, because he normally rushes for 200, 250 yards, and he still had 3 touchdowns. So he's still a front runner for the Heisman. I don't want to say front runner. He's still a Heisman candidate, and it's nice to see Quintez Cephas back with the university, back with the program. He went off. He redeemed himself. Over 100 receiving yards and 2 touchdowns. And Jack Cohn played well. I think they made the right decision starting him at quarterback, because he played well last week against Southern Florida, and he played very well on Saturday. Over 350 yards. He was 26 of 33. I think that's like around a 60-70% completion percentage, and 3 touchdown passes. So yeah, he played well. Wisconsin's playing well. They'll have a good test next week against Michigan, because I still think Michigan's a good football team. That'll be a good game to watch. And if Wisconsin were to lose that game, I wouldn't be shocked. But if they were to win that game, I wouldn't be shocked either. I think that's going to be a fantastic football game to watch. So we'll see how they do with that. But yeah, Wisconsin's playing very well. So their coaching staff, their players, their fans, they should feel good about themselves. Next up, we've got Rutgers at number 20 ranked Iowa. Now for Iowa, Nate Stanley, of course, was the starter. He played well. He was 16 for 28 for 236 yards, 3 touchdown passes, no interceptions. Torrin Young was their leading. He's tied for their leading rusher. He had 9 carries for 59 yards, averaging 6.5 yards a carry, no touchdown. Mekhi Sargent was their other rusher, who also had 59 yards, this time on 13 carries for 4.5 yards a carry, no touchdowns either. Emir Smith-Marset had 4 receptions for 113 yards, averaging just over 28 yards a catch, 2 touchdown catches. As a team, Iowa ran for 194 yards, and they had 438 total yards of offense. For Rutgers, McLean Carter was 5 of 15 for only 22 yards, no touchdowns, 1 interception. And then Arthur Sitkowski went 4 for 11 for 19 yards, no touchdowns, 1 interception as well. Isaiah Pacheco was their leading rusher. He had 10 carries for 42 yards, averaging 4.2 yards a carry, no touchdowns. And he also was their leading receiver with 3 receptions for only 25 yards, averaging 8.3 yards per catch, no touchdowns either. As a team, they ran for only 84 yards, and they had only 125 total yards of offense. The final score in this game, another blowout, Iowa 30, Rutgers 0. My reaction and thoughts, Iowa's a good football team. They've been a good football team. I don't remember the last time they weren't a good football team, so this is not a shocker. Nate Stanley played very well. He went 16 of 28, threw for over 200 yards, 3 touchdowns, no picks. And he threw some deep balls, the ones that looked really good. And yeah, I mean, big win for Iowa. This was the only Big Ten matchup that we had this week, was Rutgers-Iowa. So yeah, it's good for Iowa to get a conference win under the belt already. Rather an easier win, because Rutgers is one of the weaker, if not, Rutgers is probably the weakest team in the Big Ten. So statistically, this looks really good. Probably an easier win in real life than it is on paper. But at the end of the day, a win is a win against a conference opponent. So yeah, Iowa looking good. They're going to play Iowa State next week, and that's going to be a very good game to watch. So yeah, I don't know who's going to win that game, because both teams are playing well. Good in-state rivalry, a good Midwestern in-state rivalry. I like this series. I think it's going to be another close call, a fantastic game to watch, and I think that Iowa's a good football team. They're going to have a good season. There's not really much to say about this game, considering it was a blowout. The only thing I can say is that it's a good win against a conference opponent. And that's all I have to say about Iowa. Good win for them. They're a good football team. Next up, we've got number 21 Syracuse at Maryland. And what a game, this was. I'll start off with the stats. Maryland's Josh Jackson was the starting quarterback. He went 21 for 38 for 296 yards, 3 touchdowns, 1 interception. Javon Leake was their leading rusher. He had 7 carries for 107 yards, averaging over 15 yards a carry and 2 touchdowns. Darrell Jones was their leading receiver. He had 3 receptions for 70 yards, averaging 23.3 yards a catch, no touchdowns. As a team, they had 354 rushing yards, and they had 650 total yards of offense. For Syracuse, Tommy DeVito was the starter. He went 28 for 39 for 330 yards, 3 touchdowns, 1 interception. Mo Neal was their leading rusher. He had 12 carries for 47 yards, averaging just under 4 yards a carry, no touchdowns. Tristan Jackson was their leading receiver. He had 7 receptions for 157 yards, averaging 22.5 yards per catch and 2 touchdown catches. As a team, they only had 70 rushing yards, but they did have 400 total yards of offense, which is pretty good. The final score of this game, Maryland 63, Syracuse 20. And my reaction, wow. I thought Maryland played very well last week in their 79-0 win, but oh my goodness, this is a good football team. This is a good football team, I can tell by this performance. I mean, historically, Syracuse hasn't been a great football team, especially more recently, but they had a good year last year, and they were ranked number 21 in the country. So Maryland blew out a ranked team by 43 points. I don't know what Michael Locksley is doing there as coach, but whatever he's doing, it is working, and it is working really, really, really well. I mean, it just seemed like on every play, Maryland offensively had Syracuse's number. They knew exactly which defense they were running and how to exploit it, because offensively they were just insane. Right away, right from the beginning, Maryland had the momentum. They scored on their first drive and then forced a turnover and then scored on that. So it was 14-0 early. Syracuse would answer, and they would score a touchdown to make it 14-7 to make it close, but this was the last time it was ever close. Maryland just exploded from that point on. They made the score 28-7, and then at halftime it was 42-13, and obviously the final score 63-20. So if I'm a Maryland fan, I'm really, really excited about this team, because either Maryland is really, really good, which is probably what it is, or Syracuse is just for some reason really bad after how well they played last year. Maryland played amazing, and I have to give a lot of credit to Josh Jackson. He played very well. DeVito played well too. He had, I think, 330 yards passing, 3 touchdowns, 1 interception, but Tommy DeVito played well. Rushing-wise, they did not play well at all, and that could have been maybe what held them offensively. But, I mean, the problem with Syracuse wasn't much of their offense, it was their defense. They gave up 63 points. But yeah, Maryland, they played fantastic. They were on their A game, and I think that if they continue to play on their A game like that, boy, they could win some Big Ten games. I don't know about them beating teams like Ohio State or Michigan or anything like that. I don't want to say anything crazy like that just yet, but Maryland, if they can play the way they played on Saturday, they can beat good teams. They can beat good Big Ten teams. And great game for them, great win for them, historic win for them probably, in my opinion. And yeah, good game to watch if you're just interested in seeing teams that don't normally play well. And yeah, that's all I have to say about that one. Next up, we've got Army at number 7, Michigan. And to start off with the stats, Michigan stats, Shea Patterson went 19 of 29 for 207 passing yards, no touchdowns, but no interceptions. Rushing-wise, he had 8 carries, negative 18 yards, no touchdowns. Zach Charbonnet was their leading rusher. He had 33 carries for 100 yards, averaging 3 yards a carry, and he had 3 touchdowns on the ground. Ronnie Bell was their leading receiver. He had 7 receptions for 81 yards, averaging 11.5 yards per catch, no touchdowns. As a team, Michigan only ran for 108 yards, and they had only 340 total yards of offense. For Army, Kelvin Hopkins Jr. was the starting quarterback. They do not throw the ball a lot on offense, so he only went 2 for 4 for 43 yards, averaging almost 11 yards a pass, no touchdowns, and 1 crucial interception. Rushing wise, he had 18 carries for 41 yards, averaging 2.5 yards a carry and 2 touchdowns. Connor Slomka was their leading rusher, however. He had 29 carries for 92 yards, averaging just over 3 yards a carry, no touchdowns. And Artis Hobbs IV was their leading receiver. He had 2 receptions for 43 yards, 21.5 yards per catch, no touchdowns. Army ran for 200 total rushing yards, and they had only 243 total yards of offense. And the final score of this game in double overtime, Michigan survives 24-21. My reaction and thoughts. Michigan dodges a major bullet right here. Oh my goodness, this could have been a huge upset for Army. I mean, Michigan offensively struggled, and I mean they struggled. I don't know if they had fumbleitis or what, but they put the ball on the ground a lot. They could not run the ball at all. There were times where they repeatedly got stuffed by Army on 3rd and 4th down and shorts. And I think a lot of that actually has to do with Shea Patterson, because they tried to run the read option a lot, and he just made the wrong read on a lot of plays. Passing-wise, he did all right. He threw for over 200 yards. Army has a good defense. He didn't throw for any touchdowns, but he didn't turn the ball over. Offensively, Michigan didn't play well, in my opinion. And I understand it's a new offense, and they still have some kinks to figure out in it and get used to it. And I do think that they will improve offensively with time, but, they really struggled on Saturday with it. And Army, they had their chances to win the game. They were, I don't remember the score, but late in the third quarter, it was 3rd down and goal to go, and I think they tried surprising Michigan with a pass, which is uncharacteristic of them, and they threw a crucial interception, and they didn't get any points off of that. And then Michigan ended up scoring off of that, I believe. And then right at the end of the game, after they stuffed Michigan, game was tied, and the game was tied at 14, and they could have kicked a field goal with time expiring to win, and they just missed it wide right, which brought the game to overtime. They scored first in overtime, but then Michigan ended up answering. Michigan kicked a field goal in the second overtime, and then on 3rd down and 11, Army's quarterback, Kelvin Hopkins Jr., got sacked, fumbled the ball, and Michigan recovered it to survive. So, yeah, Michigan struggled. They really struggled. This would have been a huge, huge loss for them, considering everything that they hope to accomplish this year. And they have a test next week against Wisconsin. I mentioned earlier how I think that next week's game, Michigan at Wisconsin in Camp Randall, is going to be a great game. I really think so. Wisconsin's playing well. Michigan is ranked better than them, and I do believe Michigan is a better team, but Michigan, they struggled, and I think that Jim Harbaugh will point out their struggles in film, and they will have a good week of practice, and they will play well against Wisconsin. I think it'll be a close game. I don't know who's going to win that game. I wouldn't be surprised if either team won. And I said that already. I can see both teams winning that game. So that'll be a great game. Army should have their heads up high after that. They are a good football team, and they just played right down to the wire against the number 7 ranked team in the country at the Big House. And that is a very hard place to win. So I think that they should have their heads up high, and they should think positively about it. Yes, they could have won, and they let that one get away from them. But, they have a lot of promise and a lot of potential in the future, and I think that they will win a lot of football games. Next up, we got number 25 Nebraska at Colorado, an old Big 12 rivalry that has been reignited by a home-and-home series from last year and this year. Colorado stats, quarterback Steven Montez went 28 for 41 for 375 yards, 2 touchdowns, and 1 interception. Jaron Mangum had 11 carries for 44 yards. He was their leading rusher for exactly 4 yards a carry and 2 touchdowns. Katie Nixon was their leading receiver, and he went off. He had 6 receptions for 148 yards, averaging 24.7 yards a catch and a clutch touchdown. And Laviska Shenault, who went off last year against Nebraska in Lincoln, was pretty quiet today. I think Nebraska's defense did a good job. They held him to 5 receptions for only 31 yards, which is 6.2 average per catch, no touchdowns, and a fumble on a kickoff return. As a team, Colorado only had 89 rushing yards, but they did have a total of 464 total yards of offense. For Nebraska, Adrian Martinez went 16 for 26 for 290 passing yards, 2 touchdowns, and an interception. Rushing wise, he had 19 carries for 66 yards, averaging 3.5 yards per rush and 2 touchdowns. And so 4 of the touchdowns Adrian Martinez was responsible for, and I think those are all the touchdowns they scored were 2 touchdown passes and 2 touchdown runs by Adrian Martinez. Maurice Washington had a great day. Rushing wise, he had 15 carries for 77 yards, averaging just over 5 yards a carry, no touchdowns. Receiving wise, he had 4 receptions for 118 yards, averaging 29.5 yards a catch and a touchdown. J.D. Spielman had a good day too. He had 5 receptions for 112 yards, averaging 22.5 yards per catch and a long touchdown. As a team, Nebraska ran the ball for 179 yards, and they had 469 total yards of offense. The final score of this game in overtime, Colorado 34, Nebraska 31. My reaction, Colorado is a good football team. I think they're pretty good. Either that or Nebraska is not nearly as good as we thought they were in the offseason, because we talked about them a lot on this channel and everything that we think that they're going to accomplish. If I'm a Nebraska fan, I'm not feeling good after this one. They had a 17-0 lead at halftime, and they blew it away. A ton of credit to Colorado. They could have quit. They really could have quit, but they kept fighting, and it ended up paying off for them because they won the game, and a big win against one of their big old rivals. I think that in this game, Maurice Washington really showed his importance to Nebraska's offense because he ran the ball well, and he had an 80-yard screen pass, either an 80-yard or 75-yard screen pass touchdown in the fourth quarter. Since we talked about Nebraska's offensive struggles last week, I'll talk about it this week, even though they lost. I thought offensively they played very well at times. They still struggled at times. Like in the third quarter, they didn't do anything offensively. And early in the fourth quarter, they fumbled the ball. They turned it over. But, they obviously had the big touchdown pass to Maurice Washington in the second half at the beginning of the fourth quarter. And then Adrian Martinez scored a touchdown on his legs with about 5 minutes left to go. And I really thought Nebraska would win that game after they forced a fumble on the ensuing kickoff. And they recovered it. So they were up by 7, and they had the ball with about 5 minutes to go. They ended up doing a 3-and-out, didn't do anything with the ball on their drive. Colorado got it back. They scored. Nebraska tried to put some points on the board right at the end of the game. They couldn't. Adrian Martinez threw an interception. Game went to overtime. Defense played well in overtime. They forced Colorado to kick a field goal, and a huge sack on third down forced Nebraska to attempt a very long field goal by their punter, Isaac Armstrong, because their kicker, Barrett Pickering, was hurt, and he pushed it wide right, and Colorado won the game. So Nebraska obviously still has some things to figure out. They play Northern Illinois next week, so they'll have one more kind of let's identify ourselves, let's develop an identity type of game before they start Big Ten play. Colorado, big win for them. I think that they're going to do good things this season. I think that they're going to be better this season than they were last year, although you never know because they started off 5-0 last year and then lost their last 7 and ended up firing Mike McIntyre. And they're 2-0 now, and we'll see how they do once they hit Pac-12 play. But good win for them. Tough loss for Nebraska, especially because of the big lead that they had, and they had revenge on their minds for this game. We'll see if they can find a way to bounce back from this loss. but it is a tough loss for them, and we'll see how they continue to play during conference play. Next up, we have another great game that ended up going to overtime, and that is Minnesota at Fresno State. Minnesota's stats, Tanner Morgan was the starting quarterback. He went 16 for 23 for 234 yards, 2 touchdown passes, no interceptions. Muhammad Ibrahim was the leading rusher. He had 17 carries for 88 yards, averaging 5.2 yards per carry, and 1 touchdown. Rashad Bateman was their leading receiver. He had 7 receptions for 105 yards, averaging 15 yards per catch, and 1 touchdown. As a team, Minnesota only had 146 rushing yards, and they had only 380 total yards of offense. For Fresno State, George Reyna was the quarterback. He went 24 for 35 for 288 yards, 3 touchdowns, and 2 interceptions. Ronnie Rivers was their leading rusher. He had 15 carries for 76 yards, averaging just over 5 yards a carry, no touchdowns. Receiving-wise, the receiving leader... Receiving-wise, Ronnie Rivers had 5 receptions for 48 yards, averaging 9.5 yards per catch and 2 touchdowns there. Darian Grimm was their leading receiver, however. He had 5 receptions for 82 yards, averaging 16.5 yards per catch and no touchdowns. As a team, Fresno State only ran for 57 yards, and they only had 345 total yards of offense. The final score of this game in overtime, Minnesota won 38-35. My reaction to this game, I remember last week after watching them play South Dakota State, and I was thinking, okay, week 1 jitters. Let's see how they play week 2. And I'm just still kind of confused. I don't think that Minnesota is as good as a football team as people thought they were in the offseason. Right now, they're kind of like Nebraska, quite a bit of hype in the offseason, but they're not really showing it, except the difference between Nebraska and Minnesota is that Minnesota's winning their games. They definitely could have played a lot better, but at the end of the day, a win is a win. They could have very easily lost this game. They were down 35-28 with about 40-some seconds to go, 4th and 13 from like their 20. And Morgan threw a touchdown pass to Ottman Bell in the corner of the end zone. He made a fantastic catch for a touchdown to tie it up. So they very easily could have lost that game, but coming up very clutch in regulation, and they pulled off the win. They were able to take it to overtime. They kicked a field goal and stopped Fresno State. They took it to double overtime. Fresno State scored first. Minnesota answered. And then in double overtime, Minnesota scored a field goal, and then they held Fresno State on 4th down. So, yeah, that's how that game ended. It ended in double overtime, so excuse me for that. And then it was a fun game, entertaining game to watch. It was very back and forth. Minnesota started off 7-0. They ended up taking a somewhat big lead, 14-3, but then Fresno State kept fighting. They made it a game, and then they eventually took the lead 21-14. Minnesota tied it up. Fresno State took the lead again, 28-21. Minnesota made it 28-28 right at the end of the game. And then overtime, and I just explained what happened in overtime, and Minnesota wins 38-35. Big win for them on the road. I'm not so confident on how they're going to play once they start playing against Big Ten teams. But yeah, I'd say I'd compare them with Nebraska. They're kind of a team fighting to figure out their identity. They are winning games, but they're not playing nearly as well as I think that they can, because they do have athletes on that team, and they do have a lot of potential, especially in PJ Fleck's 3rd year. But at the end of the day, good win for them. They should have their heads up high. They'll figure stuff out in practice, and they'll be ready for their next game. And that's all I have to say about that one. So yeah, big win for Minnesota. Hopefully they can improve. Next up, we've got Buffalo at number 15 ranked Penn State. And for this game, Sean Clifford was the starting quarterback. He played very well last weekend. On Saturday, he went 16 for 22 for 279 yards, 4 touchdowns, no interceptions. Rushing-wise, he had 11 carries for 51 yards, averaging just over 4.5 yards per carry, and no touchdowns. Jahan Dotson was their leading receiver. He had 4 receptions for 109 yards, averaging 27.3 yards per catch and 2 touchdowns. And Pat Freiermuth also had a great game receiving. He had 8 receptions for 99 yards, averaging 12.5 yards per catch and 2 touchdowns as well. As a team, Penn State only had 78 rushing yards, and they only had 357 total yards of offense. For Buffalo, Matt Myers went 16 of 31 for 245 yards, 1 touchdown, 1 interception. Jarrett Patterson was their leading rusher. He had 23 carries for 71 yards, averaging just over 3 yards a carry, no touchdowns. Antonio Nunn was their leading receiver. He had 5 receptions for 113 yards, averaging just over 22.5 yards per catch, and no touchdowns. They had 184 total rushing yards, and they had 429 total yards of offense. So it looks like they dominated Penn State stat-wise, but the final score of this game, Penn State blew them out 45-13. And, well, in this game, Penn State was really slow early. I mean, they scored first. They took the 7-0 lead. But then Buffalo fought, and they took a 10-7 lead. And they were up 10-7 at halftime. So it was tough. It was a tough first half for Penn State. And then they didn't open the second half great. They fumbled the ball on their opening possession, gave it to Buffalo, but then Buffalo threw a pick six. Penn State took the lead 14-10, and then it was all Penn State from that point on, and they just, racked up the lead and won 45-13. So obviously a bit of a scare in the first half. They played very well in the second half, and they pulled away and won big by 32 points. But they do have some work to do, especially offensively. I mean, they got out-yarded by Buffalo, and they got out-rushed by Buffalo as well. So that's not something that looks really good, especially if you're a ranked team getting ready for conference play in a strong conference like the Big Ten. They got work to do, but I mean, Penn State's a good football team. They've been a good football team ever since 2016. So I think that James Franklin will get his guys ready, and they will continue to play well. They played fantastically week one. They scored 80-plus points, and I think that they are going to continue to play well. Maybe they didn't have a good week of practice this week, but they had enough playmakers and enough athletes on the field to make plays and give them an astounding win. So I think Penn State will be just fine. They got to open up games better probably so that when they come to Big Ten play, they don't start a game like they did against Buffalo, because I guarantee you if they do against a Big Ten team, they will lose. But yeah, other than that, good win, and they beat them by 32 points, so it's not like it was a close game. They just got to start games off better, but they responded and they played well in the second half, so they should have their heads up high, and they'll get better. All right, now for the last game of the video, we've got Western Michigan at number 19, Michigan State. And now for Michigan State, Brian Lewerke, he went 23 for 32 for 314 yards, 3 touchdown passes, 1 interception. Elijah Collins was their leading rusher. He had 17 carries for 192 yards, averaging 11.3 yards per carry, no touchdowns. Ladarius Jefferson also had a good day rushing-wise. He only had 5 carries for 9 yards, averaging less than 2 yards a carry, but he did have 2 touchdowns on the ground. Darrell Stewart Jr. was their leading receiver. He had 10 receptions for 185 yards, averaging 18.5 yards per catch and 1 touchdown. They had 251 total rushing yards and 582 total yards of offense for Michigan State. Wow. Western Michigan, John Wasink was the quarterback. He went 23 of 37 for 252 yards, 1 touchdown, 2 interceptions. Griffin Allstott went 4 for 4 for 33 yards and a touchdown. Levante Bellamy had 15 carries for 44 yards, averaging just under 3 yards a carry, no touchdowns. He was their leading rusher. Keith Mixon Jr. was their leading receiver. He had 4 receptions for 71 yards, averaging 17.8 yards a catch, no touchdowns. And Giovanni Ricci had a good day receiving as well. He had 6 receptions for 53 yards, averaging 8.8 yards per catch and a touchdown. Western Michigan only had 67 total rushing yards, and they had 352 total yards of offense. The final score for this game, Michigan State won 51-17. My reaction to this, good win for Michigan State. Yes, they're playing Western Michigan, but we had been talking about Michigan State's offensive struggles, especially last week when they only scored 28 points, I believe. And this is a big win for them. They scored 51 points, and they lit it up. They had over 300 passing yards for Lewerke. They had 250 rushing yards and almost 600 yards of offense. So if they can, keep the production like that, I think that they can put up some big numbers against Big Ten defenses. And hopefully, if they figure out their offense, they can win more games, because the offense is what held them out of a lot of games last year. Had they figured out their offense, they could have been a much better football team because their defense was good. Their defense was really good. Their offense just couldn't move the ball or score any points. And it seemed like, against Western Michigan, they did that very well. So if they can get that offense going, they can win some big games. Let me know what you guys think in the comment section about any of these games, about any of these teams. What do you guys think about games coming up? What are you looking forward to? What are your thoughts about the games that happened this weekend? Are you down about any games, up about any games? I would be more than happy to read you guys' comments. So yeah, comment down in the section. Let me know what you guys think. Thank you all for watching. Please give this video a like and please subscribe to the channel. Please subscribe to our main SG1 Sports channel as well. Thank you all for watching. I hope you all have a great week.